You're listening to the Health Courage Collective podcast, episode 39, What You Might Not Know About Your Holobiome. Welcome to the Health Courage Collective podcast, the show for women who are too busy to slog through hours of generalized, inapplicable, and often contradictory health information, but too smart to ignore that a few minutes of focused attention now can prevent years of suffering in the future. I'm your host, Christina Hackett, a pharmacist who doesn't want you to live on prescriptions, a certified coach specifically trained to maximize your potential, and a compulsive learner obsessed with preventative, cutting-edge, holistic, and integrative medicine. I'm on a mission to increase your physical and mental resilience so you can fearlessly look forward to your next 40-plus limitless years. Your time is now. Let's go. Hello and welcome. What is up? I hope you've had a lovely week. I'm ready to go here, sitting with my mitochondriac t-shirt on. Did you try the virtue meditation last week? I know it's a helpful thing for me, so I hope it was helpful for you. Even if the help is just to realize, this isn't for me. No problem. I think meditation is super important for everyone, but the most ideal form of meditation will be different for everyone, and that's a beautiful thing. You can even do different forms on different days or within the same meditation practice. A few minutes of silence followed by a few minutes of guided meditation or vice versa. There's tons of options. Today, we're going to talk about what you might not know about your holobiome. The first thing you might not know is what your holobiome is. Before we get to that, let's talk about what a holobiont is. Have you heard this term before? A holobiont is a collection of closely associated species that have complex interactions. A holobiont is an assemblage of a host and the many other species living in or around it, which together form a discrete ecological unit, like a coral reef. The holobiont concept was introduced by the German theoretical biologist Adolf Meyer-Aebich in 1943. The holobiont includes the host, the virome, the birome, and any other organisms which contribute in some way to the functioning of the whole. The most well-studied holobionts are reef-forming corals and humans. You, my friend, are not just a pretty face, and not just a human. You're a holobiont, a complete ecological unit. While you think of yourself as human, more than half of your cells are not human cells. You've probably heard this before. It used to be said that about 90% of our cells aren't human, but a study in 2016 showed that an average 70-kilogram adult has about 30 trillion human cells and 39 trillion bacterial cells. This doesn't take into account viruses. In addition to our microbiome, we also have a virome, which I find fascinating and hope we learn more about in the future. Viruses aren't cells, though, so they wouldn't contribute to this cell math we're doing here. I love the term holobiome, and I tried to find out who made it up. I heard it from Dr. Stephen Gundry. A lot of the information I'm using in this episode comes from his book, The Longevity Paradox, which is fabulous. If you like this episode, you'd probably dig his book. I'll put a link in the show notes. So your holobiome is you and all of the bacteria, viruses, fungi, and worms that live on you and inside of you. I like the term better than just microbiome because most people think of your microbiome as bacteria only and in your intestines only. This is for sure the biggest part of what we know so far about our holobiome, but we have different microbiomes in our mouth, which affect dental health, and on our skin, which affects our skin health, even on our scalp, which can affect our hair health. It's wild. Here's something else that I find fascinating. Humans have 21,000 genes. We think of our genes as the code that makes us uniquely us, right? I have green eyes, straight hair, and a tendency toward varicose veins because of my genes. Humans dominate the world, so it would make sense that we have more genes than any other species. Only we don't. The water flea Daphnia has 31,000 genes. Corn has 32,000. Corn! So how can we possibly be so complex? Do you see where I'm going with this? We have our measly 21,000 genes, but our whole self, our holobiont self, has way more genes than just that. You know how you remember where you were the morning of September 11th, or when you found out some major news like that Meatloaf died? He did, which is sad. That's about all I know about him. Betty White, Bob Saget, and Meatloaf all died in quick succession. Kind of weird. Anyhow, I have these dorky moments like that when I'm learning something new and awesome that's put in just the right way for me to be like, aha! And one of those moments was when I heard Dr. Gundry say this. I remember exactly which stoplight I was parked at when I heard him say, quote, "With the mapping of the human microbiome in 2017, we've discovered that complex animals such as humans who have fewer genes than plants and fleas have uploaded most of the information processing to what I like to think of as our bacterial cloud, which has vast computing power over our fate and health. Since this genome has so many genes and divides and reproduces incredibly rapidly, your holobiome has immense power to tell you, your immune system, and the organelles in your cells how things are going in the outside world. Though the genome of a bacterium is only 1/10 of a human cell's genome, National Institutes of Health researchers recently showed that the microbiome contributes 8 million unique genes to human bodies. This means there are 360 times as many bacterial genes as human genes within you or me. Since bacteria replicate so quickly and have that much genetic computing power, our bodies are capable of almost instantaneous information processing and communicating, even to the point of influencing our thoughts and actions." End quote. So much of our experience of life has to do with the expression of bacterial genes. Our fate isn't determined by 21,000 genes, but by 8,021,000 genes. Much of what has happened and will happen to us has to do with the state of bacteria in our ecosystem. Bacteria control so much, including our mood, our food cravings, how much we weigh, our blood sugar control, the manufacturing and absorption of vitamins, the production of hormone precursors, what diseases you'll develop, and how long you'll live. How do you feel about that? It might seem at first to be kind of scary that we have so little control over our own bodies, but actually the opposite is true. When we learn how to be a good host within our ecosystem, we can purposefully cultivate more bacteria with genes we want expressed, and fewer bacteria with genes we don't want turned on. How cool is that? You can design your own genome without having to engage in any freaky sheep cloning experiments. Then we really don't need to worry as much about what medical challenges our parents and grandparents had, because we can have the same human genes they had and still benefit from the expression of the non-human genes that we want and they didn't have, because nobody knew about them before. Some people think that humans and other animals were created as an evolutionary mechanism by bacteria so that they could stay alive. If you remember, bacteria were the only living things on Earth until there started to be more oxygen in the atmosphere. Then they eventually had to jump inside of other single-celled organisms to protect themselves. This turned into a symbiotic relationship where the bacteria produced energy for the cell it was inside and eventually became my favorite cellular organelle. Do you remember what it is? We talked about it back in episode 15. Your mitochondria. In that episode, I talked about wanting a shirt that said mitochondriac on it, and my husband listened to that episode and bought me a mitochondriac t-shirt, which is fantastic. I'm wearing it right now, and I love it. So your lovely little mitochondria inside almost all of your cells are evolved from bacteria. And remember, they still have bacterial-style DNA, separate from your regular DNA that's in the nucleus of the cell. And you only get it from your mom. Sounding familiar? If you remember, your mitochondria produce energy for your cells, but they also signal for cellular differentiation, cell growth, and cell death. Your bacteria in your microbiome and your mitochondria in your cells are like sisters, and they can talk to each other. What? Your microbiome can send messages about what's going on in the periphery that the mitochondria can receive and use to determine which cells will grow and which will die. We know mitochondria are hugely important to the aging process. If your mitochondria are in good shape, you will be too. But I didn't realize before how much what your mitochondria do is influenced by their sisters, the bacteria of your holobiome. Your gut buddies produce hormone-like substances and fatty acids that enter the bloodstream or the lymphatic system and go out and dock on receptors on cell membranes or mitochondrial membranes to provide information to the mitochondria. Some signals result in improved mitochondrial function and or increased number of mitochondria. Awesome. Some signals damage mitochondria, leading to premature aging. Not good. All of your bacteria are essentially out for themselves. They want to survive and thrive and expand their population. If you have lots of different good bacteria that help you produce and absorb vitamins, protect your arteries, prevent autoimmune disease, and keep you young, this is fantastic. If you have bacteria that thrive on sugar and junk food, which some do, they will hijack your mitochondrial communication system to make you crave more of those foods, which in turn will make you sick, tired, inflamed, overweight, feeling old, looking old, and increase your risk for Alzheimer's, autoimmune disease, and cancer. You've probably heard of fecal transplants before. It seems super crazy, but for some people, the only way to get well is to get a new microbiome established. And what more direct way than to take the microbiome out of a healthy person and put it in themselves? Scientifically, of course. There are grundles of studies that show taking the microbiome from a thin person and putting it in an obese person makes them lose weight. From a regulated immune system person to a person with autoimmune disease lessens the disease. From a happy person to a depressed person improves their depression, and on and on. I truly believe that in the not-so-distant future, we'll be able to easily target certain strains of bacteria or multi-strain mixes for certain people for certain conditions. A little bit of that is happening now, but it's largely guesswork. You can research specific strains and buy supplements that supposedly have those strains. You have to really trust your supplement company to put what they say in there and to handle it correctly, because keeping those little good guys alive and viable till they get inside of you can be a bit of a delicate process. There's a company called Viome that will analyze your microbiome. I always wonder what it would be like to work there, receiving hundreds of thousands of poop samples in the mail every day. I don't know how that works. It's a super interesting concept though. And I think the technology will just continue to get better, which is very cool. Viome will give you personalized food and supplement recommendations based on your current gut flora and what they consider to be a more optimal population. The way to support your healthy gut buddies is to eat healthy food, and there are some supplements that can help too. I've heard before that being in healthy, bacteria-laden environments helps too, like sticking your hands in rich, healthy soil or walking around a healthy forest. Makes sense to me. We could talk for days about which foods and supplements are best, and maybe someday we will. But for now, if you think it's healthy, it's probably good for your friendly bacteria. Colorful vegetables and berries, nuts, real nuts, not peanuts, healthy oils. Grain, especially wheat, are bad, and vegetable oils are very bad. You probably know this already, just like you know that taking antibiotics is horrible for your microbiome. Obviously, there are times when the benefit outweighs the detriment and they can be life-saving, but we have to be judicious. Also consider what animal products, meat, milk, cheese, yogurt, eggs, etc. you eat. If they're not organically raised, there's a good chance they come from an animal that was pumped full of antibiotics before it got to you. A really great way to fatten up an animal, including a human, is to decrease bacterial diversity in the gut with antibiotics. I'm sure you know about the profound evils of glyphosate. The main ingredient in Roundup is an herbicide that kills weeds, but it's also an antibiotic. That's really bad, like really, really bad. It's sprayed on many non-organic crops, but also on pretty much all GMO crops, which is part of what makes GMO crops so bad. Some crops like wheat are sometimes soaked with it to shorten their drying time. Horrible. So bad for the soil, for the planet, for you, for your microbiome, and your gut wall integrity, which is a whole nother can of worms we don't have time to open right now. The World Health Organization declared glyphosate a probable carcinogen in 2015, but it's still everywhere, disrupting the holobiomes of people all over the planet. Wow, I really don't want to be a downer, but wrecking the holobiomes of large swaths of the planet's population is worse than eating babies. Or setting up the toilet paper to roll out from the underside. Gasp. I hope you can see why saying or even definitively proving that pesticides and herbicides and GMO foods and toxins found in personal care products don't disrupt human gene expression is meaningless. Our health and energy levels and longevity come from the expression of non-human genes. Our precious holobiome, which we are only starting to scratch the surface of understanding, controls our fate in so many ways, both from its direct actions and from its communication with our mitochondria. The great news here is that there's a lot you can do to live incredibly well for a long, long time. It's all about being a good hostess, and luckily for me, that doesn't necessitate having good people skills. I think my bacterial relation skills are probably better than my human relation skills. Maybe we'll call it being a good landlord, keeping the good tenants supplied and happy and not leaving vacancies or supplies for the deadbeat tenants to get established. We need the vast computing power stored in our bacterial cloud data cache to not get corrupted. That almost instantaneous information processing and communication of intelligence is incredibly valuable. It is most likely one of the major keys to, as Dr. Gundry puts it, dying young at a ripe old age. You have goals to crush and people to help, and your 39 trillion friends can literally support you as you do that. You are so awesome. Thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it. Next week, we're going to talk about having multiple personalities. Until then, don't be normal. Thank you so much for tuning into the Health Courage Collective podcast. I am truly honored that you have paid me the enormous compliment of your time and attention. I would be so grateful if you would share this podcast with someone you know and subscribe so you never miss an episode. This podcast is for entertainment and information purposes only. Statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Christina Hackett and producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse events by use of information contained herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.